members of such a wonderful group, the singing that we saw, the performance that we experienced, and all the members of the audience. I feel deeply honored and privileged to be here today, and I would like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to share with you some thoughts about the way I make theatre. I've written something, and I'm sure I wish I could speak Bengali, but nevertheless, you'll have to suffer my um, limitations and hear it in English. Thank you very much. We tell stories all the time. Our body tells a story. How we sit, how we talk, how we eat, how we interact, how we dress, all tell a story. As we grow up, we read books, we see films, hear each other's stories, and through these stories that come our way, we claim them, we make them our own. The artist combines and edits materials that already exist in order to create something new, something fresh. Every work of art bears reference to another work. Everything then becomes a remix, processed and combined, that new stories and fresh way of working are generated. Many years ago, I recall the story which I heard from the Dalai Lama. He was asked, "Would you like to be born again despite the fact that the world will not get better?" He answered, "If I could be useful, then I would like to be born again." In a violent culture, attracted by fame and success, the notion of usefulness is radical. How can art be useful? Art, I feel, is an extravagant and exquisite waste of time and a world complete by itself. Yet the irony is that art is useful in a deep and enduring way. The poet Joseph Bronsky describes art as the oxygen that might arrive when the last breath has been expended. I work in the theatre, or theatre chose me as much as I chose theatre, because it helps me to articulate my daily life, challenges me, helps me to take decisions, teaches me how to reject, and also be part of a community. But I must confess that when I first started out as a student, my passion for theatre began as a naive fantasy about an exciting world of possibilities. My interest was sincere, though I had no real understanding of what it meant to be a part of the world of drama and performance. The word art was floating around in my mind, but I had no idea about the contours of the business. When I, as a student in the 70s, arrived in Chandigarh to study the history of art at the Punjab University, I was getting a bit bored because I didn't have enough to do, so I began working with the director and playwright Balwant Gargi. At that point in my life, my involvement was more about making my life interesting rather than any burning passion for the arts. As unlike Bengal and most middle class families in Punjab, art could be perceived as a hobby but could never be perceived as a legitimate profession. The possibility of making theatre as a vocation and having a space to pursue a calling in the arts was unimaginable. The National School of Drama was coming to perform in Chandigarh, and being an art student, I volunteered to help. The two productions that I saw, one was Othello and one was Just Ma Oren, had me paralyzed with excitement and awe. I had never encountered in my life such passionate acting, such strong visual language, and intellectual rigor. I knew I had to drop everything and move in that direction. I joined the National School of Drama without the awareness of what drama meant. Ibrahim Al Qazi, the director of the school, defined for me an aesthetics for theatre and a work ethics. The single most far reaching impact that he made was to make us recognize that theatre was not like a hobby class. He introduced us to the possibilities of theatre as a profession, which required as much seriousness, labor, and commitment as one would need to become a lawyer or a doctor or any other professions which were acceptable during my time. B.V. Karan, another wonderful director whom I worked with in Bhopal, created an articulation about the evolving role for director of his search to produce a theatre that could express the complexities of contemporary life, taking into consideration training tools that had local origin, vernacular moorings, and regional sensibilities. These two separate approaches to theatre produced a certain kind of alchemy with no premeditated design or plan. How I put these two trainings together without a roadmap of funds was my challenge. Al-Qazi's school of theatre was very much based on high realism, epic theatre, a kind of rigorous training, a Stanislavskian kind of method of approaching a character. He was to me a Renaissance man, a man with many, many dimensions which he imparted to his students very generously. But B.V. Karan was more into improvisations, into a kind of folk impulses, into the actor's body being the tool of how to create and how to deal with space. So these two separate systems of training became my fertile ground of exploration. I moved to Chandigarh in 1984, and during my meanderings, I started working with the Nakal performers and actors from Chandigarh. These are traditional performers. The word Nakal means to imitate, which comes from a Persian word. I worked with them because they had certain qualities which were quite fascinating. The most fascinating quality for me was the fact that how they constructed the feminine on the stage, how they broke all the rules of realism, how they could sing and dance and play simple musical instruments. What was interesting is that they worked with B.D. Karan for 22 years until he passed away in 2002, I think. Um, he made them use their simple, humble village instruments in a non-traditional manner. He made them recognize that the instrument was not only the strings of the ek tara or the leather on top of the drums, but every part of the body of, of the musical instruments that made sound could be used as a soundscape to create a kind of a musical pattern which was unusual, which was unique, and which seemed to give a sense of an orchestration of different familiar sounds and unfamiliar sounds. And that was a very interesting introduction that came into my work. My creative journey into Punjab, formalizing a process of training and creating performances through translations and collaboration, not only between cultures and regions, but even across genders, became my challenge. Very often, when I do a play, I never look at the actor that he's a male or a female. For me, I'm more interested in how he will incorporate the qualities of the character that he has to project, and gender is one of them. So I've had sometimes a male character play a very important and significant and iconic female character without any reservations. And what is wonderful is that none of the tropes of what it means to be a woman or what it means to be a man are used um, as crutches to create the character. It is the internalization of gender that I'm more interested in rather than the obvious cliche, stereotypical dimensions of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. The first time I met the Nakals, they were performing in a village square, singing, dancing, ad libbing, and telling stories. A mixture of pop art and natural fun was their chosen vocabulary. The stories they enacted were pan Indian myths, conjoining local myths, transformed and renewed for local meaning. The gods that they evoked rode bicycle, aspired for a sarkari naukari, cursed like soldiers on a rampage, and sweated profusely. In the middle of a tragedy, a horse appeared on the stage and broke into a song. In an episode in the famous love legend from Punjab called Sohini Mehwal, the matka, or the earthen pot on which Sohini travels and crosses the river Chenab to meet her lover, suddenly animates itself and starts to narrate the story to the audience. This is a theatrical device that does not fit into any known grammar of performance that I had been trained to look at and believe in. But it nevertheless was completely acceptable to the audience that was witnessing this performance. While watching them perform, I understood for the first time the true meaning of what it means to be spontaneous, what openness means, to see a large number of people sitting under a starlit night and to observe how the audience pumped energy and excitement into the performance was to recognize that something precious and meaningful was being exchanged. Something snapped within me. As most of us go into the theater at that point of time, and still happens, involved sitting in neat rows in the dark, hardly acknowledging the presence of strangers sitting next to us, never expecting the actors to invade our space, or even dreaming we could claim or stake a claim to their space. Just to give you a little background of the Nakals, unlike the Jatra and unlike Tirukuttu or Tayyam or Kodiyatam, Punjab folk forms do not have a long, continuous lineage. They are paradoxically without a continuous or firm tradition. They enact ballads, sing and dance, and lampoons the powers that exist with the conventional license of clowns. In recent times, their considerable popularity has been challenged by cinema and television, and they had to survive by doing disco dancing at weddings and other community festivals. But in my work, they appear along with urban actors not as decorative acts or even as signs of cultural aesthetics, but to experience how actors coming from different worlds can come together with their varied skills and make a piece of art together. Many directors that I know and I have worked with believe that theatre is a place where an actor recites a written text, illustrating it with a series of movements and actions to make it understandable. Interpreted this way, theatre becomes an accessory to dramatic literature. Every word that is written has a history that is older than the tongue that has spoken it, and every myth has many masters. In my place, I'm interested in the multiple cultural sources, and therefore, for me, each play has many authors which are brought to life through a performance. I'm drawn to the many voices that speak through the text. The method that I use mostly for creating a play, not mostly, but almost all my plays are created that way, is based entirely on improvisations. Improvisation becomes a common language. An idea or a text is shared with the actors, but the actors initially are not required to learn the lines. They must comprehend the situation and have some idea of the context and the given situation. But even within that, there are many risks that I wish them to take in the hope of discovering what I call the unwritten text. I give them certain suggestions that are both physical as well as conceptual. I provide them with possible objects and certain costumes. Most times, despite my instructions, the actors produce something completely different from what I suggested. But the actors provide the raw material. Some actors create through improvisation a fully realized idea, and sometimes it becomes a sort of sketch which can be developed and pulled out and be dovetailed into the final production. But what happens in an improvisation? Each participant has the same power in the creation of an event. An object would have the same significance as the human body. The spoken word would be on the same footing as the gesture. One idea could hold the same significance as another. Theatre, as we all know, is practice oriented. And during the course of my work, I've realized that every aesthetic choice that I make needs to be a practical one as well. What sort of costume should the character wear? What kind of stage business do I give the character? If I edit a speech, will it disturb the meaning? How do I position the actor on the stage? Rehearsals are a way of setting an exact sequence of events. Preparing for a role is a constant state of training so that when a situation arises, one is ready to do what is appropriate for the scene. Improvisations for me are considered a valid process for preparing a role, but that should not in any way suggest that only the spontaneous response of the moment is needed to create theatre. The response of the moment occurs through a complex ballet between the mind, the body, and the heart. When this occurs intuitively and without tension, it releases a feeling of sheer spontaneity. As Stanislavski, in his book The Actor Prepares, says very uh, in a very interesting manner that one has to work very hard to appear spontaneous on stage. What he meant by this was that a performance is not only rehearsed and performed, but it is also prepared through a complex journey that is both physical as well as internal. I think the work of every director begins with intuition. I really do not believe that the director's work is about control, of telling actors what to do, having a definitive idea, and then urging the actors to make those ideas visible and concrete. I do not believe personally that these are the qualities required for a director. Direction for me is about feelings. It's about being in a room with other people. It's about a feel for time and space, about breathing, about responding to the situation that we create, to be able to plunge into the unknown and then encourage the actors to also take that plunge. Theatre is not about understanding what's going on, it's about meeting someone you don't know, it's about uncertainty. That is why I always believe that certain aspects of the production are set and some are open. In other words, do you set the content, do you set the action, or do you set the emotions? Rehearsals are about eliciting these emotions and then fixing them. However, human emotions, as we know, are ephemeral and can they really be fixed and summoned up at will? Therefore, I'm convinced that it is better to set the exterior elements, the choreography, the action, the object, the movement, and allow the interior, the ever altering inner landscape, to move and change. This way for me is this is my way of working because I'm more interested in form, not because I'm more interested in form, but it's because I wish to acknowledge human experience and the freedom of emotional thrusts. The set may be conventional or may swerve towards the suggestive, but I like the physical space in which I work to be animated with objects. These objects are not merely props as much as they are elements of a production with their own voice. They speak without the actors having to give them a name. A tree of water can suggest a river, a burnt car, a genocide, or a tinsel piece of cloth, a snake. So the power of suggestion is very important for me. You suggest something, you convince the audience that this is a suggestion and this is what you believe in. You put your energy into a sense of faith and belief and concentration that this object that you are touching is actually burning your hands. And the audience, with their imagination, pick up that suggestion and become part of an understanding that flows between what is happening on the stage and the audience which is sitting in the auditorium. I also believe that no text can be dreamt by different directors in the same way. It will always be imagined by various directors in different ways at different points of time. To take a text and assign a single corresponding interpretation to it is to impose a limit on the text. Every work is written here and now, and with each rereading, fresh meanings will emerge. Meaning is not determined by language itself, but by its impact on the actor, how it's internalized, how we make it our own. From text to performance is a journey that is taken by the actors and the director, and one knows that any good writing contains multiple layers and meanings. A text for me is dead only when it is connected to a process of closure, to an absence of exchange. In other words, a text becomes dead when it does not travel, change, or evolve. A playwright is a poet, a metaphysician, a historian. However, once a play is written, it has a life of its own that goes beyond the intentions of the playwright alone. The play becomes alive differently in the mind of the director and in the body of an actor. In a nation, I mean, today Shakespeare is relevant. Today Tagore is relevant. Today we love reading Manto, Siddharth Hassan Manto, or a Chekhov because it travels through time. And that is why it is called classical literature because the values contained in the text have been able to transcend time, culture, regions, and speak to us in ways that we can relate to it. It has that capacity, that fluidity, that openness. In a nation which has as much power and beats through our blood as much as the modern, the only solution is to create without subordinating one with the other. The truth is that the past persists and the modern persists, and the future is not a victory between the two. The materials that enter into performances comes from dreams and memories, and these are not exclusively modern or traditional. I always ask myself, what is a cultural space and what are its limits? Do the local meaning that are found in the works of the Greek classics, Sanskrit plays, and the works of Shakespeare not carry within them the echoes of humanity? If we look at the nation's most popular sports, clothing, and music, we will find that all of these have a complex and long cultural history that travels far beyond national borders. Yet, the dominant and popularized narrative about our cultural identity is one monolith concept of belonging whose values of purity, authenticity, and homogeneity are all based on the negation of dynamic exchange that brings all cultures into one civilizational pool. Is it, it is impossible to talk about Indian culture as a monolith. A country which speaks in so many voices, that lives simultaneously in so many eras, and has a complex and rich history, cannot be standardized and encapsulated by singular notions of identity. When I direct a play, a Racine or a Lorca or a Tagore, I always bring the play to the present moment, to bring the characters in a context in which they might unfold and reveal the stories of mankind. Is it the present? Is it a historical moment of the past? Is it an imaginary country or society? Because each play carries a baggage of their own histories. Interior context becomes the issues which we need to explore. The story may not connect with any immediate dilemma within me or what the world is undergoing, as sometimes what we need and yearn for is the fantastic. Is it possible? Is it impossible? Is it imaginary? Because people sometimes want to travel outside themselves, hence the need for fantasy, hence the feel need for an imaginary world. Yet, can that imaginary world ever exclude the realities that we are surrounded by, the dark forces that threaten our existence, our safety, our freedom? My work with my theatre company does not set out to tell a moral story, to sway public opinion or campaign a cause. A space one which one a space where one must avoid falling into an idea and search for the true, not the realistic. The truth is not always realistic. To enter the stage into is to enter into a symbolic space where everything is imagined. It is through my work that I enter into hidden gardens, eat the fruit, spew the venom, hear the elusive note, dance with the birds, and become whoever I wish to be. I've been able to lead multiple lives through my work and enrich myself in the process. In Nagamandala, I reflected on how moments of love, moments of happiness, do they really happen or are they imagined? In Yerma, I learned that the artist, and particularly the poet, is always an anarchist in the best sense of the word. He must heed only to the call that arises within him, the voice of death, the voice of love, the voice of art. In Fedra, I understood systems of patriarchy. When Fedra wails, how these vain ornaments, how these veils oppress me. Kitchen Katha, a play about food, suggested to me that each of us is born with a box of matches inside us, but we can't strike them on by ourselves. In Haivadan, myth became real and magic realism an extension of one's consciousness. In my various outings with Sadat Hassan Manto, I smelt the sweat of decaying bodies, the angst of women wronged, the madness that hate generates. Working on these plays was my way of leading many lives, of becoming many people, of understanding myself. The theatre, even as it entertains, is always a search for meaning, a quest. One of the basic functions of art is what the Greeks called catharsis. According to Aristotle, catharsis is that purifying and cleansing of emotions, evoking a sense of fear and pity in the audience. The etymology of the word catharsis is to shine through dark spaces. But without looking into those dark spaces within us, as Carl Jung said, we will lose touch with what we call our essential humanity. All the world's a stage has become true in a different sense by plays written in a particular language specific to its cultural locale and traveling to different cultures, language, historical periods, and getting transformed in this journey, in this whole process. Peer Gynt finds resonance in all cultures and can be comprehended like peeling the onion in search of your Ganeshan self, is an image that finds resonance in all cultures and can be comprehended without any euphemism. Drama has remained for me an attempt shared between an actor and an audience to peel away the layers of the onion to see if it has a beating heart. In theatre, as in other arts, metaphors created to articulate what is most difficult to express or difficult to realize. Metaphor is pointing indirectly in order to look at something directly. But also, a metaphor adds deeper, more subtle, and complex levels of meaning. The theatre is an art form that employs metaphors consistently and constantly. When I was writing this paragraph, I wanted to know the etymology of what metaphor really means. Metaphor really means to transport. It's a transportation of ideas. So we use it in theatre to transport ideas which sometimes are too complex, too layered to be articulated through words, through body, through text. So we create an image that contains all the essence of what we really wish to say. We all, as we know, are today the targets of mass distraction, objects of constant flattery and manufactured desire. I believe we can resist all that by quality. We know the world to be vicious, unjust, and completely unbearable at the moment. But within that, I know that my development as a person is directly proportional to my quality of discomfort that I feel with all that's the dark hole that we're being sucked in. When I'm constantly confronted by conflict, displacement, and social injustice, I feel I have to do something. My chosen field of action is theatre. We do not just go to watch, but take ourselves to every show. This made me recognize that theatre does not exist in isolation, but always within social, political, geographical, and architectural contexts. Somewhat I recognize that things were changing and also the rules are there to be broken and that the fourth wall can be battered down even in the case of classical text. Since the last 7, 8 years, written plays are not suited for what I'm searching for. At the present time, it's an instinctive rejection, not, I would like to emphasize, not a judgment. It's in the absence of a pre-established text, it's always difficult to decide when a production is over, when to begin, what is the climax. When you move in undefined spaces, one thing you recognize that this form of performance isn't as free as one thought it was. Gradually, one notices that when one is working, one is constantly taking decisions, making choices, erasing, adding, chiseling, faltering, never certain. Maybe it was something I was constantly doing, even in the earlier stages of when I started doing theatre. When I was working with pre-existing texts like Federico Garcia Lorca or Jean Racine or Girish Karnad's, one tried to develop, even through a well-made play, an individual authorship through a reworking of the given text, through workshops, improvisation, and establishing a collaborative relationship between the actor, text, and the body. The beginning and the middle and the end of a well made play was always being reconstituted, reassembled, and looked at afresh. In the course of my work, can I have some water, please? In the course of my work, I've recognized that creation can be collective only when everyone ensures maximum creativity in each function and someone centralizes it. I don't think in that system my role as a director is diminishing, but I think the actor's responsibility is increasing. I think the role of the actor will always remain fundamentally different from mine, but the dialogue or the conversation becomes like a dialogue and conversation between two equals who are fulfilling different functions. As a director, I realize that I'm the only person in the group that does not make or create anything in the physical sense of the word. Fire, water, sand, mud, smoke have been real elements in my work. In Yarma, a rope strung across the stage was lit up and it created a sheet of fire. In Kitchen Katha, 10 gas cylinders were arranged and the actors and musicians cooked food on the stage, and the timing of the scene had to be synchronized with the cooking time. Actors speaking while eating, musicians singing while cooking was not only done in accordance with the time required to cook, but also an understanding of one's digestive system, how material behaves on stage, how mud and paint creates transformation. Materials also became my actors. They extend the meaning of the narrative, articulate which seems most difficult to articulate, and transforms simple, everyday, familiar objects to the level of a metaphor. Would this be described as an insistence on realism? I would call it an insistence on truth, which is the opposite of realism. Realism for me is facts, and facts for me. don't fit into my creative space. Theatre, as we all know, is not necessarily a cozy place designed to make us feel good. We stick around because it reminds us of the wonders and passions that we've always had for the world and have now not only lost it or forgotten it. Theatre keeps holding out a hope for a shared space in a segregated world. It invites us to enter into a space of the unspoken, the unspeakable, and helps us to reimagine reality not just as an idea, but something we can touch, feel, smell, and taste. Thank you very much.